The 2025 college football season was absolutely awesome, and we saw on Monday night Ohio State claim a national championship despite losing to both Oregon and Michigan. I'd say pretty much everyone was thrown for a loop, and that's what happens in college football. Things that are predicted to happen never end up happening, and it never goes according to plan. That happens with the AP poll pretty much each and every year now, as at the beginning of the year there were a lot of teams who were projected to compete for a national championship who were not even relevant by the end of the season. In today's video, I want to take a look back at the preseason top 25 poll that was released this fall and go through how those teams did and ultimately where they all finished. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you can support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and compare the preseason to the postseason AP poll. At number 25, we had the Iowa Hawkeyes, who pretty much each and every year have the same record. While they ended up being projected as the number 25 team, they would finish with an 8-5 record, with a 5th place finish in the Big Ten. They ended up losing to number 19 Mizzou in their bowl game, and didn't really do a whole lot this year. They lost to the best teams on their schedule, and beat who they should beat. Pretty typical of Iowa. At number 24, we had a team that ended up being a disaster in the NC State Wolfpack. The Pack ended up being projected to be the number 24 team, but ended up going 6-7 and finished 10th in the ACC. Their star quarterback Grayson McCall got a terrible injury, and they really didn't do much. And they really didn't do a whole lot the whole year. They didn't really have any good wins, and then they lost to East Carolina in their bowl game. It was a forgettable year for NC State. At number 23, we had the USC Trojans. Under Lincoln Riley and their new quarterback Miller Moss, the Trojans were supposed to take over college football, and after starting out strong, they kind of fell apart in the middle of the year, losing 4 of 5 games. Luckily, they'd bounce back towards the end of the season, right in the ship, and make a bowl game, where they then went and beat Texas A&M 35-31. Despite the good finish, they did not finish ranked in the final poll. At number 22, we had the Kansas Jayhawks. Led by awesome coach Lance Leipold and star quarterback Jalen Daniels, KU was supposed to have one of their best seasons ever. Ended up starting out horrible, as they lost 5 of their first 6 games before getting hot and beating 3 straight ranked teams to almost get to bowl eligibility. Sadly, Kansas ended up going 5-7 and had a 10th place finish in the Big 12. They'll hope to bounce back next year as Daniels returns once again. Another team from the Big 12 who was supposed to have an incredible season were the Arizona Wildcats, but everything was a disaster under first-year head coach Brent Brennan. Despite having 2 superstar players in Noah Fafita and Tedero McMillan, Arizona just couldn't get anything going, as they ended up going 4-8 and finished 13th in the Big 12. Shockingly though, they weren't even in the top 2 of most disappointing teams in the conference. Okay, so at number 20, we had first-year head coach Mike Elko and his Texas A&M Aggies. I don't know if they deserved to be ranked in the preseason, but they ended up having a good year. After losing to Notre Dame early on, the Aggies ended up going on a hot streak where they won 7 straight games before losing 4 of their last 5. It was a bad end of the year, but A&M ended up finishing at 8-5 with a 4th place finish in the SEC. We've already talked about 6 teams, and it's not until team number 7 that one of these guys actually finished ranked in the postseason poll. The Miami Hurricanes, led by transfer quarterback Cam Ward, ended up having a tremendous start to the year, but late losses to both Georgia Tech and Syracuse derailed their college football playoff and ACC title hopes. They also lost to Iowa State by 1 point in their bowl game, and despite Cam Ward breaking that record, Miami finished 10-3, and that was seen as a disappointment, to be honest. Luckily, they still would end up finishing the year ranked, as they come in at number 18. They were picked at number 19, so it was actually pretty dang accurate. At number 18, we ended up having the Kansas State Wildcats, who led by their newfound star quarterback Avery Johnson, was supposed to take over and potentially win the Big 12. They ended up getting off to a hot start, as by the time November had rolled around, they were still in the playoff hunt, but after losing 3 of their last 4 regular season games, they imploded themselves out of the Big 12 race and out of a playoff spot. They luckily beat Rutgers in their bowl game, but the Wildcats finished at 9-4 with an 8th place finish in the Big 12, and despite winning 9 games, they were not in the final AP poll. Now we get to arguably the most disappointing Big 12 team, and that was the Oklahoma State Cowboys. They were picked to finish number 17 in the country, and after bringing back 15th-year quarterback Alan Bowman and Ollie Gordon, they were supposed to win the Big 12. Instead, after starting out 3-0 with that early win over Arkansas, they lost their last 9 games, finished dead last in the Big 12, and ended up having a terrible season. The Cowboys went 3-9 and were not even close to making that final ranking sheet. Man, to me it's still crazy that most of these teams that were predicted to be in the preseason top 25 didn't end up having all that great of years. The Oklahoma Sooners in their first season in the SEC ended up having a very slow and disastrous season. Besides that one huge win over a top 10 Bama team, Oklahoma was extremely boring and lost pretty much everyone decent on their schedule this year. The Sooners ended up going 6-7 though, and at the end of the year would lose to Navy 21-20. There's a lot that needs to be fixed for Oklahoma moving forwards, and they were nowhere near a top 25 team at the end of the season either. First, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, MyBookie. The 2024-25 football season might be wrapping up here shortly, but if you have a strong conviction about a certain team winning, go ahead and head on over there. This season, MyBookie is pulling out all the stops with incredible promotions like a weekly risk-free boost on Thursdays where you can bet without a sweat. If your bet hits, you win big. If it doesn't, forget it. MyBookie will refund your wager. But that's just the beginning. MyBookie is giving away hundreds of thousands in prizes with their Super Survivor and Square contests. Get your entries now in for your shot at huge cash rewards. When you're ready to get started, be sure to use my promo code Fisher50 and make sure to get some extra cash on top of your first deposit. If you type in Fisher50, you'll get up to $1,000 in a welcome bonus bet plus a $10 casino chip. MyBookie's tiered bonuses make it easy to deposit with crypto or with credit, and the bigger your deposit, the bigger your bonus. The bonus would be 100% match up to $1,000 plus a $10 casino chip. With MyBookie, you can bet on anything, anywhere, at any time, and make your season a winning season. Be sure to check out my link down below and use my promo code Fisher50. Okay, so at number 15, we had the Tennessee Volunteers. With a new quarterback and running back, some were a little bit concerned about Tennessee, but for the most part, people were super excited for the Vols, and that's exactly how the season played out for them. Led by their superstars Nico Yamaliava and Dylan Sampson, Tennessee ended up getting off to a hot start, and with losses to both Arkansas and Georgia, they were still able to make the 2024 college football playoff. Unfortunately, things would end on a sour note as they got killed by Ohio State 42-17, but making the playoff was a huge step for them, and they'll try to reload in 2025 and make another run, and after starting the year ranked 15th, they'd end up finishing the season at number 9. One team that has been a staple in the preseason top 25 has been the Clemson Tigers. To start out the year, they were picked to be the 14th best team in college football, but after getting kicked around by Georgia in week 1, many thought they were fraudulent. A loss to Louisville a couple weeks later didn't help their case, but then they win 3 of their last 4 games, go to the ACC Championship, beat a top 10 SMU team, and then they ended up putting up a fight against Texas in the playoff. Honestly, Clemson ended up having a good year, as a couple of things went their way, and while they weren't perfect, Clemson fans had to be happy with how things played out. The Tigers ended up finishing as the number 14 team in the country, and that's exactly where they started. Going into 2024, LSU was supposed to be one of the top teams in the SEC, as they came in as the number 13 overall team. Led by new quarterback Garrett Nussmeier, some were wondering how they would adapt after losing most of their starting core. Well, after a week 1 loss to USC, LSU actually was a really good football team. They won 6 straight games, before then losing 3 straight in the month of November, and ultimately they would win their last 3 games, including beating Baylor in a bowl game, and they went 9-4. Despite starting out as the 13th best team in college football, they actually finished as the second team left out of the postseason rankings. We now get to the second most disappointing team in this preseason top 25 list, and that is the Utah Utes. After coming in at number 12, many expected with their 15th year quarterback Cam Rising for Utah to win the Big 12 in year 1. Unfortunately, after winning their first 4 games, they ended up falling apart. I mean, they really fell apart. They would end up losing their next 7 games before finally getting a win against UCF on that last weekend, and the Utes would end up going 5-7 with a 13th place finish in the Big 12. Some are wondering if Kyle Whittingham is almost done, and despite starting out as number 12, they finished nowhere near that ranking list. Alright, so next up we have my Mizzou Tigers. The Tigers were picked to be the 11th best team in college football this year after a breakout 2023 campaign. They ended up returning a ton of key pieces, and Mizzou had a really weird year. They ended up barely winning a lot of games they were supposed to, and then lost to all the best teams on their schedule, which were South Carolina, Bama, and Texas A&M. They then would beat Iowa in their bowl game, and despite the Tigers going 10-3 and having a 4th place finish in the SEC, a lot of people thought they actually had a pretty disappointing year compared to the hype. Mizzou started out the season ranked number 11, and they would finish at number 22. Still a decent year for Coach Drinkwitz. Now at number 10, we get to one of the most disappointing teams in college football history, and that is the Florida State Seminoles. After going undefeated in the 2023 regular season, Florida State got left out of the playoff, and many were really unhappy with this. They had a chance to bounce back in a big way in 2024 as they loaded up in the portal, and many thought that Norvell had a good thing going in Tallahassee. Unfortunately, after 2 early losses to Georgia Tech and Boston College, we found out they were frauds. They ended up having 2 total wins on the year against Cal and Charleston Southern, and the Seminoles ultimately went 2-10. They lost a lot of their star players, including future big-time quarterback Luke Krummenhoek, and Mike Norvell has a huge rebuild ahead of him for 2025, and he needs to bounce back soon. He started out top 10, and probably was in the bottom 10 by the end of it. I'm not quite sure how Michigan fans actually view the 2024 season. After winning a national championship last year, everyone knew there was going to be somewhat of a rebuild with new head coach Sharon Moore, but Michigan had a season full of highs and lows. Yes, they beat Alabama and Ohio State, but they also lost games to Washington, got blown out by Oregon, and also got blown out at home by Texas. Michigan wasn't a bad team, but they weren't an elite team either. Honestly, they had one of the weirdest seasons this year, and after finishing 8-5 with a 7th place finish in the Big Ten, the Wolverines were picked to finish 9th and didn't come. The Wolverines were disappointing after starting out number 9. At number 8, we had another team from the Big Ten, and that was the Penn State Nittany Lions. Honestly, the Lions had loaded up at pretty much every position, and the big question mark was going to be the receiver spot and if Coach Franklin could finally win big games. Honestly, that narrative didn't change a whole lot in the regular season, as they ended up losing to Ohio State and then lost to Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. Still, though, they were able to make the playoff, where they then rolled off 2 straight wins against number 11 SMU and number 3 Boise State. They then would lose by 3 points against Notre Dame, and honestly, it was a very successful season for Penn State, as they went 13-3, finished 2nd in the Big Ten, and after starting out number 8, they would finish at number 5. The team right in front of them were the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Led by head coach Marcus Freeman, many thought that Notre Dame could have a spectacular season, and that's exactly what would happen. Despite that weird Week 2 blunder against Northern Illinois, Notre Dame had pretty much a perfect year. They may not have played the craziest competition in the world, but they were a dominant team and got themselves in the playoff. They then rattled off wins against number 10 Indiana, number 2 Georgia, number 6 Penn State, and then had an opportunity to make it close with Ohio State at the end, but ultimately let up a big pass and lost the national championship game. After the Irish started out at number 7, they would finish the season at number 2, and this is huge for Coach Freeman and all those people up in South Bend. At number 6, we have the Ole Miss Rebels, as they returned Jackson Dart, their 3-headed monster at receiver, and loaded up in the portal. Unfortunately, Lane Kiffin was not able to put things together in 2024, as after a stupid loss at home to Kentucky, they were in hot water. They then lost by 3 to LSU, and things were looking dicey, and then they blew the season after 15 straight interceptions from Jackson Dart at the end of that Florida game. Ole Miss went 9-3 and lost to 2 teams they absolutely should not have, but they were still bargaining to try to get into the playoff, even though they obviously didn't deserve it. The Rebels did go ahead and win their bowl game against Duke 52-20, but after going 10-3 with a 4th place finish in the SEC, the team that started out ranked number 6 in the country would finish at number 11. On paper, it wasn't a bad year, but based on the losses and how it played out, it was very disappointing. At number 5, we have the Alabama Crimson Tide. Led by new head coach from Washington and Kalen DeBoer, the Crimson Tide were off to a hot start in the 2024 season, but ultimately lost a couple of dumb games and found themselves out of the playoff. They lost on the road against Vanderbilt, 40-35, lost on the road against Tennessee, 24-17, and then got absolutely humiliated on the road against a really bad Oklahoma team. Because of that, Bama ended up having 3 losses, and they whined more than anybody to get into the 2024 playoff, but luckily they had an opportunity to go ahead and beat Michigan in their bowl game to set the record straight. Instead, they ended up losing against the Wolverines, and after going 9-4, Alabama had a disappointing year. They started out the season ranked number 5 and would ultimately finish at number 17. At number 4, we had the Texas Longhorns, who made the college football playoff last year and were anticipated to be one of the top programs in the sport this season. After an early victory on the road against Michigan, many thought they were headed to greatness, but they didn't honestly play that great of a schedule. Sure, they had wins against number 18 Oklahoma and number 25 Vanderbilt, but besides that, they didn't really do anything besides that win against A&M. They ended up having a really poor performance at home against Georgia, but then after finishing close against Georgia in the SEC Championship, the Longhorns obviously got an opportunity to go to the playoff, where they beat number 12 Clemson and then beat number 4 Arizona State. Unfortunately, they lose late against Ohio State, and after going 13-3 with a 2nd place finish in the SEC, the Longhorns were picked number 4 and finished number 4. At number 3, we had the Oregon Ducks, and they ended up having a great season. After beating Boise State in Week 2, they ended up having a thrilling victory against number 2 Ohio State later on, and then wins against both Illinois and Michigan were also great before beating Penn State in the Big Ten Championship. Oregon had gone 13-0 in the regular season and were selected to play in the college football playoff, where they would rematch against number 8 Ohio State. They'd end up getting killed in that one, and despite going 13-1 with a 1st place finish in the Big Ten, there was a lot left to be desired. Oregon started the year at number 3, and they finished at number 3. At number 2, we had the Ohio State Buckeyes, who brought in a new quarterback, got a couple of big names out of the portal, and returned a ton of starters. Ohio State had an interesting season, as after losing to Oregon midway through the year, they bounced back with a win against Penn State and Indiana, but lost at home to Michigan. This sent the fan base into a firestorm, but after making the college football playoff, they go on a run. They beat number 9 Tennessee, number 1 Oregon, number 5 Texas, and number 7 Notre Dame to win the national title. It was a tremendous year for the Buckeyes, and after starting at number 2, they found their way over to number 1, but it didn't happen in the way we all thought. Finally, the preseason number 1 team was the Georgia Bulldogs, and they also had an interesting season. After beating Clemson early on, they lost in Week 4 to Alabama, and then also dropped a game to Ole Miss. At 10-2, the Bulldogs ended up winning the SEC Championship and got themselves a bye, but would lose to Notre Dame in the first round. Sure, they didn't have Carson Beck, but Georgia ended up getting outplayed in that one. After going 11-3 and winning the SEC Championship, Georgia would start the year at number 1 and finish at number 6. Somewhat disappointing. Okay, so some other teams that came out of nowhere and made the AP poll despite not being preseason ranked were Arizona State, who ended up finishing at 7, Boise State, who finished at 8, Indiana, who finished at 10, SMU, who finished at 12, BYU, who finished at 13, Iowa State at 15, Illinois at 16, South Carolina at 19, Syracuse at 20, Army at 21, UNLV at 23, Memphis at 24, and Colorado at 25. But what do you guys think? What were your opinions on all these teams? Who had the worst and best season? And what topic should I do next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.